Alligator Alcatraz in 2025. While some flock to it to take pictures and videos like it's a tourist attraction, others are calling it cruel and unusual. In today's conversation, I want to remind you that the cruelty is the point, and that it's not that unusual. What it is tired, dated, and a recurring type of inhumanity that American society tends to cultivate. Think about it for a second. Naming a migrant camp Alligator Alcatraz isn't some cheeky marketing stunt. It's a full-blown strategy. By wrapping real people in predatory image and dungeon-like drama, Florida's power brokers aren't just beefing up the tough-on-crime narrative, they're sending a message that newcomers are less than human and that cruelty is patriotic. That kind of spectacle boosts headlines and fundraising, but it also taps into something darker in our national DNA, an itch to punish, to watch suffering as a form of entertainment. How much further will we allow this to go? What we need now is a complete course correction. Over the next few minutes, we're going to explore what it is that we're dealing with and perhaps a more humane way forward. Let's start with putting this spectacle in context. In June 2025, Florida Attorney General James Othmeyer announced the creation of a new immigration detention facility in the Everglades, officially naming it Alligator Alcatraz. Built on a former airstrip at Dade Collier Training and Transition Airport, the compound was erected in just 8 days under the state's declared immigration emergency, bypassing standard procurement and environmental reviews to house up to 5,000 detainees in heavy-duty tents and mobile units surrounded by alligator-infested waters. Championing the project, Governor Ron DeSantis argued it would ease federal deportation pressures on local jails and ICE while positioning Florida as a hardline leader on immigration enforcement. The rapid construction and choice of an isolated, ecologically sensitive site, one prone to intense heat, humidity, and seasonal storms, immediately drew criticism from environmental advocates and indigenous groups, who filed suit arguing the camp threatened endangered habitats and violated tribal land protections. The very name, Alligator Alcatraz, blends the specter of the former maximum security prison in San Francisco Bay with Florida's apex predators, framing detainees as both criminal and prey. In a video announcement, the Attorney General declared the site would be, and I quote, checking in hundreds of criminal illegal aliens tonight. Next stop, back to where they came from, evoking a tone of punitive spectacle rather than due process obligations. Governor DeSantis further promoted the location as the best natural perimeter money can't buy, suggesting that crocodilian security might deter escapees and even encourage self-deportation. This rhetoric sanitized state-sanctioned cruelty by casting wildlife as surrogate guards, while political allies quickly turned the facility into a branding opportunity, selling hats, t-shirts, buttons, and bumper stickers emblazoned with the Alligator Alcatraz logo on GOP merchandise sites. At its opening on July 1st, 2025, President Donald Trump quipped that Alligator Alcatraz might be as good as the real Alcatraz, even joking with the reporters that if detainees tried to escape, that's the concept, to let alligators enforce the perimeter. By invoking Alcatraz, the camp equates victims of immigration violations, many of whom have no criminal records, and include families, mothers of newborns, and U.S. citizens, with violent offenders like Al Capone and Machine Gun Kelly, obscuring fundamental distinctions between civil infractions and felonies. This framing turns detention into a macabre attraction, normalizing the idea that human beings, particularly those of brown or black heritage, are expendable in the name of border security. The use of alligator imagery to dehumanize minority has deep roots in American popular culture. This is why I say it's not that unusual. From the 19th through the mid-20th century, alligator bait was a common urban legend and racist trope depicting black children as literal bait for gator hunting, a motif that appeared on postcards, sheet music covers, coon card greeting cards, and even novelty letter openers complete with miniature black children figures in the alligator's jaws. Now, although scholars have debunked any widespread historic reality of humans serving as gator bait, the trope reinforced white supremacist assumptions that black lives were sacrificial and disposable for sport or amusement. As recently as 2020, the University of Florida officially retired its gator bait cheer after acknowledging the phrase's horrific historic racist imagery, a tacit admission of how deeply embedded such alligator-themed slurs have been in Southern culture. The spectacle of Alligator Alcatraz Branded as a spectacle for political gain and deterrence, echoes a long-standing American fascination with violence as both entertainment and policy. By packaging state-sponsored cruelty alongside alligator lore, Florida's leadership taps into a cultural tradition that equates certain lives with predator food, weaponizing wildlife to mask intentional suffering. This nexus of fear, cruelty, and carnival-style marketing underscores a broader national tendency to deploy violence and the image of carnage against marginalized communities, rather than addressing the root causes of migration or upholding human rights. What does this spectacle cost us? Let's discuss how dehumanizing imagery and violent rhetoric, like naming an immigrant detention site, Alligator Alcatraz, affects individuals and society, especially under conditions of intense polarization. Number one, eroding moral restraints through dehumanization. When a target group is presented as other or animal-like, ordinary moral inhibitions against harm are suspended. Psychological research shows that dehumanization removes humaneness from the victim, making violence seem acceptable or even laudable. Once people no longer see detainees as fully human, with feelings, rights, or agency, they're far more willing to endorse punitive measures or turn a blind eye to suffering. In democratic contexts, this process corrodes the principle of equal moral worth and paves the way for rights violations to proceed unchallenged. Number two, this amplifies disgust and hostility. Linking immigrants to predators taps into basic disgust reactions, one of our most visceral antisocial emotions. Studies find that framing out groups as disgusting or subhuman inflates support for exclusionary policies, ranging from harsher detention practices to outright bans on migration. In a polarized environment, these disgust-based narratives feed on confirmation bias, making any counter evidence less persuasive. Number three, it fuels group polarization and radicalization. As people congregate in ideologically like-minded networks, extreme language and imagery get amplified. Alligator Alcatraz rhetoric echoes group polarization dynamics where repeated exposure to hardline slogans pushes attitudes toward greater severity, often with no new facts introduced. In highly segmented media ecosystems, each reinforcement cycle solidifies in-group identity and deepens out-group animus. Number four, this undermines democratic norms. Once dehumanization enters mainstream politics, it weakens trust in democratic institutions. Research shows that when citizens routinely consume dehumanizing portrayals of political or ethnic outgroups, they become more tolerant of anti-democratic actions, such as extrajudicial detention or curbs on due process for those others. Leaders who weaponize violent imagery signal to followers that extraordinary measures are justified, weakening checks and balances. Number five, this normalizes state-sanctioned violence. Branding a detention site with predatory animal tropes turns coercive enforcement into a spectacle, blurring the line between policy and entertainment. Sociologically, this creates a carnival-style culture of cruelty where suffering is commodified. Hats and t-shirts become badges of in-group membership, and empathy becomes a mark of softness. The result is a feedback loop. The more the public consumes this spectacle, the more political actors feel licensed to escalate. Number six, there is a mental health toll on perpetrators and targets. Dehumanizing rhetoric doesn't just hurt the victims. Perpetrators and bystanders suffer too. Chronic exposure to violent, dehumanizing messages elevates stress, anxiety, and even social identity crisis among in-group members who come to see democracy itself as a battlefield rather than a shared civic project. In sum, when a society brands a vulnerable group with violent animal imagery, particularly in a hyperpolarized context, it undermines empathy, erodes democratic norms, and primes both us and them for escalating conflict. Breaking this cycle requires leaders and media to explicitly reject dehumanizing tropes, reinforce shared human values, and create spaces where cross-group understanding can be rebuilt. We have to find ways to replace spectacle with safeguards. Let's explore a vision for a healthier, more humane response, one that counters dehumanizing spectacle with empathy, rights, and community building. We need to restore humanizing language and framing. We need to swap predator metaphors for person-first language. Legislators and officials should refer to those in custody as people in migration proceedings or non-citizens, not illegal aliens, criminals, or prey. And to be clear, in this country, criminals do not exist without due process. Research shows that neutral descriptive terms reduce support for punitive policies compared to metaphors that evoke animals or vermin. We need to adopt best practice guidelines for respectful discourse. Health equity experts recommend avoiding disgust eliciting frames and instead highlighting shared experiences, framing immigration as a human story, not a criminal problem. We also need to strengthen oversight and rights protections. We need immediate independent inspections and transparency. Within days of opening, the facility should allow DOJ, ICE's Office of Professional Responsibility, and the Department of Homeland Security's Office for Civil Rights and Civil Liberties unrestricted access, and open the site to reputable human rights monitors and the press. We need to ensure due process safeguards. Lawyers and family members must have guaranteed access to their clients with timely hearings and medical care. The ACLU has urged swift legal oversight to prevent forced self-deportations under duress and to uphold constitutional protections. We also need to use the tools of media and education to promote empathy. We need to center the stories of the immigrants. News outlets and social media campaigns should feature personal narratives, parents separated from children, asylum seekers fleeing violence, to humanize the other. Framework Institute research finds that empathy-focused storytelling counteracts fear-based rhetoric and broadens public support for humane policies. We can leverage moral leadership. Faith leaders, civic figures, and community influencers can publicly condemn dehumanizing language and model inclusive messaging, shifting norms away from spectacle towards solidarity. We can also facilitate positive intergroup contact and perspective taking. We need to create structured contact opportunities, whether it's hosting joint service projects like habitat builds, community gardens, or cultural exchanges, where residents, local officials, and newcomers collaborate side by side. A meta-analysis of 515 studies shows that such intergroup contact reliably reduces prejudice and hardens pro-social attitudes. We can encourage perspective-taking exercises, workshops that guide participants to step into another's shoes and imagine contact interventions have been empirically shown to lower stereotypes and increase willingness to engage across group lines. And of course, the elephant in the room, we need to invest in alternatives to detention. We can expand community-based case management. Rather than remote camps, we need to assign qualified caseworkers to oversee compliance, check-ins, electric monitoring, while individuals live with sponsors or in transitional housing. Such models maintain accountability without the trauma of mass detention. We can scale legal aid and integration services, fund nonprofits to provide free counsel, language classes, job placement support, and mental health care, demonstrated to improve compliance with migration procedures and reduce long-term social costs. By replacing spectacle with safeguards, humanizing narratives, and genuine cross-community engagement, society can diffuse fear, uphold democratic norms, and foster solidarity, even amid deep polarization. Now, for me, I think that the real conversation should be education. I'm not convinced that America's national crisis is immigration, but there is more than enough evidence to suggest that education should be the #1 contender. Let's discuss how centering education, rather than fear, can shift the national conversation, harness human potential, and diffuse dehumanizing rhetoric. A society secure in its schools and training systems doesn't view newcomers as threats, but as contributors and collaborators. Investment in universal access to early childhood, K through 12, and tertiary education builds both skills and civic confidence. For example, Australia's Productivity Commission warns that cutting tertiary enrollment risks recession, whereas boosting university capacity could add over $240 billion to the economy by 2050. Similarly, the UK's Vice Chancellor at Cambridge stresses that maintaining global talent pipelines through supportive immigration and strong universities is essential for sustaining innovation and jobs. Well-educated nations attract and amplify immigrant-driven innovation. Though immigrants make up roughly 19.5% of the U.S. workforce, they account for about 29% of all patents, demonstrating how a skilled environment magnifies their impact. Studies from the Hoover Institution likewise shows that higher educated migrants deliver the strongest boost to local innovation and that native workers gain the most from their presence. By prioritizing STEM and vocational training, a country maximizes these returns and transforms perceived competition into collaboration. We can use inclusive education to counter dehumanization. And contrary to popular belief, education doesn't just happen in the public school system. Curricula designed to humanize the other reduce prejudice at its root. The Jigsaw cooperative learning model, where students teach each other in small, interdependent teams, has been shown to increase empathy, decrease stereotyping, and improve academic outcomes across racial lines. More broadly, meta-analysis of intergroup contact find that structured, positive interactions under equal status conditions reliably lower dehumanization and build social cohesion, even amid perceived threats. Embedding anti-bias modules, critical thinking exercise, and shared project work into K-12 and adult education reinforces these gains. As a society, we need to consider universal early learning and lifelong training. We need to expand pre-K access, apprenticeships, and community college programs so every resident, native or newcomer, can continually upskill. We need to mandate courses that teach about rights, the legal process, and critically evaluating political messaging to inoculate against fear-mongering. We can consider approaches that integrate through service, pairing newcomers and long-term residents in community projects, whether it's public works or local entrepreneurship incubators, to build shared stakes and dispel myths. We can allocate resources so high-need districts and adult learners receive targeted support, ensuring that no community is left behind. Because that's what's happening here. By redirecting resources and rhetoric toward education and opportunity, a nation can transform the immigration debate from one of predators and prey into a shared story of growth, innovation, and mutual respect. We can leave the cruelty where it belongs, in the past. Let's swap the animal metaphors for honest, person-first language that reminds us all we're talking about mothers and fathers, children and friends. Pair that with real investment in schooling, from pre-K through trade training, and you create a society that doesn't see immigrants as threats, but as neighbors with skills and stories to share. Add community-based support programs, legal aid, and job pipelines, and you turn threat into talent, and talent into teammate. In other words, if we really want to starve the alligators, we have to feed our own capacity for empathy, education, and opportunity. Thank you so much for joining today's conversation. If you'd like to support this work or connect to the community, consider joining my Patreon and checking out some of the other links in the description. Also, if you're in the Nashville area, I'm going to be at the Nashville Nuns Convention, and I'd love to meet you in person. Speaking of in-person meetups, if you would love to be part of local meetups in your area around people-centric conversations, activities, and events in partnership with me, I need you to do two things. Number one, head over to the BC Weekends website and tap in. That's how I know not just how many are interested in your area, but also what levels of interest, such as attending, hosting, or leading. And number two, enroll in BC 101, How We Change the World. It's a free 4-module-based course where you get to learn more about the vision of building people-centric communities while also getting to interact with other members through the forums. It's the fastest and easiest way to learn about that side of the mission while getting prepared to be a part of a local project in your area. And if you're in California, Texas, Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, Maryland, Michigan, I can literally continue to go on because that's how many states we now have growing hubs, and it's time to start pulling you together, especially if you're in South California. I don't know what's happening there, but I want to get there to meet you guys because there's so many of you there. So get over to that website and sign up. And last but not least, maybe getting connected is not your thing, but you do want to have conversations like these in small groups with your friends, but don't know where to start. The great news for you is that Windows Shop now features a library of study guides fully equipped with discussion and reflection prompts that you can download to use as group discussion or workshop resources. So again, peruse all the links in the descriptions and connect, support, or partner in whatever way that makes sense for you. That's all for now. Until next time, keep rising.